A first-class ticket buys you luxury, but it can't buy you respect. On a transatlantic flight from New York to Paris, one woman, a titan of industry cloaked in quiet elegance, asked for a glass of champagne. It was a simple request met with a sneer and a refusal that echoed with the ugly hiss of prejudice. The flight attendant thought she was putting an upstart in her place, saving the finest bottle for more suitable clientele. She didn't know the woman she insulted wasn't just a passenger, she was the creator. And that single condescending no was about to uncork a vintage of karma so devastating it would shatter one life and reshape an entire corporation. This is the story of how a single glass of champagne triggered a multi-million-dollar crisis. The hum of the Boeing 777's engines was a familiar lullaby to Dr. Serena Dubois. It was the sound of progress, of moving between the two worlds. She commanded the sun-drenched rolling hills of her Napa Valley vineyard and the fast-paced high-stakes boardrooms of international distributors in Europe. At 45, she possessed a stillness that was often mistaken for aloofness. It was, in fact, the deep-rooted calm of a woman who had built an empire from the soil, a woman who understood the patient, deliberate process of turning struggle into triumph. She settled into seat 2A in the first-class cabin of Meridian Global Airlines Flight 88. She was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored camel hair blazer over a cream silk blouse and dark trousers, the uniform of a woman who valued quality over flash. On her wrist, a vintage Patek Philippe, watch a gift to herself after her first $1 million quarter, was the only hint of overt wealth. She was engrossed in a well-worn copy of The Physiology of the Vine, its pages filled with her own neat, penciled-in annotations. The flight attendant assigned to her section introduced herself as Clarice Jenkins. Clarice was a woman in her late 50s who wore her uniform like a suit of armor and her seniority like a crown. She had the brittle, lacquered perfection of someone who had spent 30 years perfecting a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She moved through the cabin with an air of proprietary authority, her attention a currency she distributed with careful, calculated prejudice. The white-haired man in 2C, a tech CEO Serena recognized from the cover of Forbes, was greeted with a dazzling smile and "Mr. Henderson, what a pleasure to have you with us again. May I get you started with your usual Macallan 18? The young blonde couple in row 1 were fawned over their youth and presumed old money, earning them Clarice's most saccharine tones. When Clarice reached Serena, the temperature seemed to drop by several degrees. The dazzling smile was replaced by a tight, professional smirk. "Can I get you something before takeoff?" The tone was clipped, efficient, lacking any of the warmth she'd shown the others. "I'd love a glass of water to start, please." "Still with a slice of lime?" Serena replied, not looking up from her book, accustomed to the subtle yet persistent gatekeeping she often encountered in spaces like these. The water was delivered without the lime. A small thing. An oversight, perhaps. But Serena knew it was the first note in a familiar, dissonant symphony. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the lead flight attendant began the main service. Clarice pushed the polished drinks trolley down the aisle. Her movements were a performance, the graceful uncorking of a Bordeaux for Mr. Henderson, the theatrical swirl of a Chardonnay for the woman in row 1. When she arrived at 2A, she stopped, her hand hovering over the lesser wines. "And for you?" she asked, her eyes flicking from Serena's face to her simple attire, a silent, swift appraisal that ended in a clear, unspoken verdict. "You don't belong here." Serena finally closed her book, marking her page with a leather bookmark. She looked directly at Clarice, her gaze level and unnervingly perceptive. I'd like a glass of the Aurora Cuvée, please." A flicker of something annoyance disbelief crossed Clarice's face. The Aurora Cuvée was the airline's crown jewel, a recent addition to their first-class service. It was a boutique, highly lauded, sparkling wine from a small but ferociously prestigious Napa Vineyard Ethelgard Estates. It retailed for nearly $200 a bottle and was notoriously difficult to acquire. It was the kind of champagne Meridian Global served to signal ultimate luxury. Clarice's professional mask tightened. "The Aurora Cuvée," she repeated, as if Serena had misspoken, perhaps confusing it with the Prosecco. "Yes, that's the one." Serena confirmed, her voice soft, but laced with an undeniable thread of steel. Clarice paused a beat too long. "Of course," she said the words, barely concealing her reluctance. She turned her back stiff and made her way to the galley. The minutes stretched. Mr. Henderson received his wine refill. The couple in row 1 were offered warm nuts. Serena waited, observing the deliberate delay, a classic power play she'd seen 1,000 times before. It was a test, a way of communicating without words that her request was an inconvenience, an overreach. When Clarice returned, her hands were empty. Her expression was one of practiced, insincere regret. The battle of wills was about to begin. Clarice stopped beside seat 2A, her posture a masterclass in passive aggression. She leaned in, slightly creating a bubble of forced intimacy, and lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were doing Serena a favor. "I am so sorry," she began the apology, ringing hollow. "But it seems there's been a slight misunderstanding. The Aurora Cuvée is being reserved on this flight." Serena's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "Reserved? I wasn't aware that was a policy. I've flown this route 12 times. It's a new directive, just for our most exclusive routes." Clarice lied smoothly, inventing protocol on the spot. Her eyes held a glint of triumph. She was the gatekeeper, and she was keeping the gate firmly closed. "It's being held for our Platinum Concierge Key members, who might be boarding later or connecting. We have a very limited supply, you understand. I can, however, offer you a lovely Italian Prosecco. It's quite popular." The condescension was breathtaking. To offer a Prosecco as a substitute for a Grand Cru champagne was not just a downgrade. It was an insult, a clear message that Serena's palate, and by extension, her status, was not refined enough to warrant the real thing. Across the aisle, a young man in seat 2D, Liam O'Connell, a tech startup founder on his way to a conference in Paris, lowered his noise-cancelling headphones. He'd been half listening, and the blatant discrimination was making his skin crawl. He surreptitiously angled his phone on his lap, the screen dark, and pressed record. Serena maintained her composure, a mask of polite inquiry. "Platinum Concierge Key. That's a new tier for me. And this policy applies even if the cabin isn't full and those members aren't on board." Clarice's manufactured patience began to fray. The woman wasn't backing down as she was supposed to. She wasn't taking the hint. "Ma'am, it's a matter of inventory management for the airline's most valued clients. I'm sure you can appreciate the need to protect our premium assets." The term premium assets hung in the air thick with insinuation. Clarice looked Serena up and down again, this time more obviously. The simple blazer, the lack of ostentatious jewelry, it all confirmed her initial assessment. This woman was likely flying on a company-paid ticket, an upgrade, or even points. She wasn't their kind of first class. "So, just to be clear," Serena continued, her voice dropping to a calm, precise tone that commanded attention. Meridian Global's official policy is to withhold a product that is listed on the menu from a ticketed first-class passenger based on a speculative hierarchy of other passengers who may or may not even be on the aircraft. Clarice's face hardened. Her customer service facade crumbled, revealing the raw prejudice beneath. The policy is to ensure our best offerings are available for our legacy customers. Now about that Prosecco, or perhaps you'd prefer a Sauvignon Blanc. She was dismissing the conversation, her tone final. It was in that moment that Serena decided. She hadn't sought this confrontation. She was tired, she had work to do, and she simply wanted a glass of the exquisite wine she had spent 10 years of her life perfecting. But this was no longer about a beverage. It was about the quiet, insidious poison of assumption, the 1,000 little cuts she and so many others had to endure. She held Clarice's gaze. The cabin seemed to go silent around them. Liam's phone was still recording. Mr. Henderson had paused his movie. "The Prosecco won't be necessary," Serena said, her voice as crisp and cool as the wine she was being denied. "And I find your policy fascinating, truly, especially from a business and partnership perspective." Clarice blinked, confused. "I'm not sure I follow." Serena gave a small, sad smile. "You see, my name is Dr. Serena Dubois, and I am the founder and chief enologist of Ethelgard Estates." She let the words settle in the pressurized air of the cabin. She watched as Clarice processed the information. The flight attendant's brain seemed to short-circuit her eyes, widening in slow-motion horror. Serena delivered the final devastating blow. "I own the Vineyard. Aurora Cuvée is my champagne. And I personally negotiated the exclusive multi-million-dollar contract with your airline's head of catering, a Mr. David Chen. A contract which I can assure you contains no clause about reserving my product for legacy customers. In fact, it explicitly stipulates that the Aurora Cuvée is to be served to any and all passengers in the first-class cabin to promote the brand. Your refusal is a direct breach of that contract." The world froze for Clarice Jenkins. The blood drained from her face, leaving a pasty-grey mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The smug gatekeeper had just slammed the gate in the face of the queen of the castle. The premium asset she was so keen on protecting was owned by the very woman she had just deemed unworthy of it. Her mind raced, replaying every condescending word, every dismissive glance. It was a catastrophic, career-ending miscalculation. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. The hum of the engines was the only sound in a world that had just completely and irrevocably fallen apart. The silence that followed Serena's revelation was heavier than any turbulence. It was a dense, suffocating blanket of shock and humiliation. Clarice Jenkins stood paralyzed, her face a canvas of disbelief, morphing into sheer terror. The trolley laden with its lesser offerings suddenly seemed like a defendant's stand. Serena did not gloat. She simply watched her expression, one of profound disappointment rather than anger. She had won, but it was a hollow, exhausting victory. Finally, Clarice found her voice, a strained, desperate squeak. "Dr. Dubois, I had no idea. I am so terribly sorry. It was a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake. Let me get you a bottle right away. The whole bottle, of course. It's yours." Her entire demeanor had changed. The condescending authority was gone, replaced by a frantic, fawning obsequiousness that was almost more insulting. She was a different person, not because she realized the bigotry of her actions, but because she recognized the power of the person she had wronged. Serena held up a hand, a simple, elegant gesture that stopped Clarice in her tracks. "No, thank you, Clarice. The moment has passed. I've quite lost my appetite for it now." The refusal was more damning than any tirade could have been. It wasn't about the champagne anymore. It was about the principle. Accepting it now would be to tacitly forgive the insult that prompted the refusal, and Serena was not in the business of cheap grace. "But, please," Clarice stammered, wringing her hands, "allow me to make it up to you. Anything at all. I'd like to finish reading my book in peace." Serena said, her voice gentle but unyielding. She picked up her copy of The Physiology of the Vine, its title now a screaming indictment, and opened it to her bookmarked page. It was a clear, unequivocal dismissal. Defeated, Clarice stumbled back towards the galley, her composure utterly shattered. Inside the small private space, she leaned against a counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her mind was a whirlwind of panic. This wasn't just a customer complaint. This was a B2B crisis she had single-handedly created. She thought about the name on the bottle Ethelgard Estates. She had assumed it was some old, white, family-owned business, as most of the prestigious ones were. The image she'd had in her head was of a portly, ruddy-faced man in a tweed jacket, not this poised, impossibly elegant black woman who had dismantled her with quiet, surgical precision. The other flight attendants in the galley gave her a wide berth. The story had already spread through the cabin crew's silent communication network of raised eyebrows and subtle headshakes. Clarice was radioactive. Meanwhile, in seat 2D, Liam O'Connell stopped the recording. He had captured it all: Clarice's smug refusal, Serena's calm questioning, and the final stunning revelation. He looked over at Dr. Dubois, who appeared to be calmly reading, but he could see the slight tension in her jaw. He felt a surge of admiration for her grace under fire. As the flight continued, a funereal quiet settled over the front of the cabin. Clarice did not reappear. Another younger flight attendant took over the first-class service, her demeanor towards Serena marked by a nervous, almost reverential respect. She refilled her water glass with lime without being asked. Every 5 minutes she would ask if Dr. Dubois needed anything, her voice trembling slightly. Serena simply read her book, but the words on the page were a blur. She was thinking about the journey. Not the flight to Paris, but the decades-long journey that had brought her to this seat. She thought of her mentor, the original owner of Ethelgard, a kind old man named Arthur, who had seen her raw talent when she was just a viticulture student at UC Davis. He had left her the then-struggling vineyard in his will, to the shock and horror of his own family. She remembered the bank loan officers who had looked at her with the same dismissive skepticism as Clarice. She remembered the distributors who told her a black woman couldn't be the face of a luxury wine brand. She had proven them all wrong, bottle by award-winning bottle. And yet here she was at 30,000 feet, still having to justify her existence, still having to unveil her full resume just to be treated with basic decency. When the plane began its final descent into Charles de Gaulle Airport, the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated. For Clarice Jenkins, it felt more like a warning light for the life that was about to crash and burn. The moment the wheels touched the tarmac in Paris, the fragile truce of the cabin dissolved. As passengers began to stir, collecting their belongings, Liam O'Connell unbuckled his seatbelt and crossed the aisle to Serena's seat. He spoke in a low, respectful voice. "Dr. Dubois, my name is Liam O'Connell. I'm sorry to intrude, but I saw and heard everything that happened. It was completely unacceptable." Serena offered him a tired but appreciative smile. "Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. I appreciate that." I hope this isn't out of line," he continued, hesitating for a moment. "But I recorded the entire exchange on my phone. The audio is crystal clear. I thought you should have it, to do with as you see fit." Serena looked at him, surprised. She was a deeply private person. Her first instinct was to decline to handle the matter through official, discreet channels. But then, She thought of the countless other times she had let smaller slights slide for the sake of a quiet life. She thought of other people of color who didn't have her platform or power, who had to swallow these indignities daily. This was bigger than her. "I don't know what to say, Mr. O'Connell. Thank you. That is very kind," she said finally. "It's nothing," he replied. "What she did was wrong. People need to know." He quickly airdropped the video file to her phone. A small icon popped up, representing a digital bomb that was about to detonate. After clearing customs, Serena sat in the back of her chauffeured car, speeding towards the heart of Paris. She didn't watch the video. She didn't need to. She had lived it. Instead, she made a call, not to the airline's customer service hotline, but to the head of her public relations team, Isabella Rossi, a sharp, fiercely loyal woman based in New York. "Isabella," Serena began, her voice steady. "We have a situation with Meridian Global." She recounted the entire story from the missing lime to the final chilling line about owning the Vineyard. Isabella was silent on the other end, but Serena could practically hear the gears turning in her brilliant strategic mind. "And a passenger recorded it?" Isabella asked, her voice sharp with focus. "Yes. I have the file." "Serena, are you okay?" "I'm tired, Izzy. I'm just tired of it." Serena admitted a rare moment of vulnerability. "Okay, you focus on your meetings. Let me handle this," Isabella said, her tone shifting from concerned friend to formidable professional. "I'm not going to leak the video to a gossip blog. That's not your style. We're going to do this the right way. We're going to write the story ourselves." Within hours, Isabella's team had drafted a statement. It was a masterpiece of corporate communication, cool, factual, and devastating. It didn't scream racism. It didn't have to. It simply laid out the facts of the incident on Flight 88, highlighting the breach of contract and the unfortunate training gap that led to a valued partner being treated with inexplicable discourtesy. The statement was sent not to the tabloids, but to the most respected publications in the business and travel worlds, the Wall Street Journal Bloomberg and Condé Nast Traveler. Attached to the email was the audio file offered as corroboration. The story exploded. By the time Serena was finishing her first meeting in Paris, it was the lead story on every business news site. The audio clip with Clarice's condescending tone and Serena's calm, methodical dismantling of her lies was irresistible. It was a perfectly packaged drama of modern-day prejudice and epic comeuppance. Hashtags bloomed across social media. Meridian meltdown, champagne ceiling, Ethelgard air. The name Dr. Serena Dubois was everywhere, her story of self-made success and quiet dignity contrasting sharply with the ugly prejudice she had faced. Pictures of her elegant and powerful standing among her vines in Napa were juxtaposed with the faceless, disembodied voice of Clarice Jenkins on the recording. Meridian Global Airlines was caught completely flat-footed. Their stock, which had opened strong, began to slide. Their social media channels were a dumpster fire of outrage. Their initial response was a boilerplate PR nightmare. Meridian Global is committed to diversity and inclusion. We are investigating the incident and have suspended the employee in question pending a review. The public saw it for what it was, a weak, soulless attempt at damage control. They weren't just angry at a single flight attendant. They were angry at a system that allowed someone like her to flourish for 30 years. The world was now watching, waiting to see what the airline would do. For Dr. Serena Dubois, the matter was out of her hands. For Meridian Global, the crisis was just beginning. The fallout from the Flight 88 incident hit Meridian Global's headquarters in Atlanta like a Category 5 hurricane. The sterile, glass-walled office of CEO Robert Caldwell became a frantic war room. Caldwell, a man whose silver hair and tailored suits were meant to project an aura of unshakable control, was watching his company's reputation get shredded in real time on a bank of monitors displaying news feeds and stock tickers. The company's stock had already shed 4% of its value, a paper loss of nearly $500 million. Their premium brand partners were calling. Bulgari, which supplied their first-class amenity kits, was re-evaluating their partnership. The corporate booking agency that handled travel for Google and Microsoft had paused all new first-class bookings, with Meridian citing concerns from their clients. This was no longer just a PR problem. It was a full-blown financial catastrophe. "What in God's name happened?" Caldwell thundered at his terrified executive team. "How did we let a flight attendant start a $500 million fire? A flustered VP of in-flight services, a man named George, cleared his throat. Robert, the employee, is Clarice Jenkins, 32 years with the airline. Seniority out the wazoo. By all accounts, she was old school." "Old school?" Caldwell shot back, his voice dripping with venom. "Is that what we're calling blatant racism and contractual breach?" Now did anyone look at her file? A hasty review of Clarice Jenkins' employee file was launched. What they found was a history of minor complaints, all of which had been dismissed as trivial or explained away by Clarice's supervisors who valued her seniority. There was a complaint from 3 years prior from a Latino passenger who claimed she'd purposefully ignored his call button. Another from an Asian couple who said she'd made a condescending remark about their English. Each was a small red flag easily ignored on its own. But together, they painted a portrait of a woman who used her uniform as a shield for her bigotry, a pattern of behavior Meridian had systematically ignored. The most damning discovery came from the catering division. The multi-million-dollar contract with Ethelgard Estates was pulled up. It was exactly as Dr. Dubois had described. Meridian had fought hard for that contract. Ethelgard was a darling of the wine world. Wine Spectator had just given the Aurora Cuvée a 98-point rating. Having it exclusively in their first-class cabins was a major coup, a key part of their marketing strategy to attract high-end clientele. And Clarice Jenkins had used that very symbol of prestige as a weapon of prejudice against its creator. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Caldwell's phone buzzed. It was Serena's PR head, Isabella Rossi. He took the call, his knuckles white. Isabella's voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the Arctic chill behind it. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm calling on behalf of Dr. Dubois. We've seen your press release. It's insufficient. Ms. Rossi, I assure you we are taking this with the utmost seriousness," Caldwell began, but she cut him off. "Seriousness? Your company allowed an employee to humiliate a key business partner. This isn't just about one passenger's bad experience. Your airline has insulted the Ethelgard brand. Dr. Moore, Dubois is currently in Paris, being asked by every distributor she meets if Meridian Global thinks her product, and by extension, her is only suitable for certain people." The blade twisted. Isabella had reframed the narrative. It was no longer just a racism issue. It was a brand-on-brand attack. "What does Dr. Dubois want?" Caldwell asked the question, heavy with the unspoken offer of a massive settlement. "Dr. Dubois is not interested in a settlement," Isabella replied, anticipating his move. "She is interested in seeing what kind of company Meridian Global truly is. Ethelgard Estates is putting its partnership under formal review. You have 48 hours to present a concrete plan of action that goes beyond firing one employee. We expect to see a proposal for systemic change. Otherwise, we'll be invoking the brand disparagement clause in our contract and taking our champagne elsewhere. I'm sure your competitors at Delta or United would be thrilled to have it. The line went dead. Caldwell slammed his phone down on the polished mahogany desk. This was a nightmare. Losing the Ethelgard contract would be a humiliation, a public admission of failure that would echo through the industry for years. He looked at his terrified executives. "Get me everything on Clarice Jenkins," he ordered, his voice dangerously low. "I want to know where she lives, what she eats for breakfast, and every single infraction she's ever committed in her 32 years. Dig. If she's ever so much as stolen a packet of peanuts, I want to know about it. This fire started with her, and we are going to use her to put it out." The corporate machinery of Meridian Global, with its limitless legal and investigative resources, now turned its full terrifying power onto one flight attendant. Clarice Jenkins thought she was having a bad day. She had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Clarice Jenkins sat in the suffocating silence of her living room, a space as rigidly controlled and impeccably beige as her public persona. The television was on mute, its screen, a silent, flashing torment of news chyrons featuring the names Meridian Global and Ethelgard Estates. Outside the manicured lawns of her quiet Long Island suburb, baked in the late summer sun, it was a world of serene order, a world she had meticulously built and curated, and she could not fathom that it was under any real threat. In her mind, she was the aggrieved party, a loyal soldier of 32 years being thrown to the wolves over a simple misunderstanding. She saw Dr. Serena Dubois not as a titan of industry, but as a new money agitator, an overly sensitive woman looking to make a scene. 32 years of perfect service, she muttered to the empty room, conveniently editing out the decades of microaggressions and petty power plays. 32 years, and for what? To be undone by some woke mob on the internet. Her confidence, however, was a brittle facade. It was propped up by a single unwavering belief, the airline stewards and stewardesses union. She had paid her dues for over 3 decades. They were her fortress. Her union representative, a weary man named Stan, had spoken to her that morning. His words were meant to be calming, but they carried an undercurrent of caution she chose to ignore. "Just lay low, Clarice," he'd advised. "Don't talk to anyone. Let the outrage die down. They can't fire you for this. It's a customer service dispute. We'll grieve it. They'll make you take some ridiculous sensitivity course, and you'll be back on the Paris route by Christmas." Clarice clung to that phrase. They can't fire you for this. It became her mantra. She had survived airline mergers, bankruptcies, 9/11, and 1,000 other industry crises. She would survive this. She was a fixture, a part of the airline's very fabric. She was untouchable. She was catastrophically, delusionally wrong, while Clarice was polishing her silver and reassuring herself a very different operation was spooling up in a sterile, windowless office at Meridian's JFK operations hub. Robert Caldwell's order to dig had been interpreted with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate state going to war. He had hired a third-party corporate investigations firm, a team of former federal prosecutors and FBI agents who specialized in forensic accounting and internal malfeasance. They descended not with the intention of reviewing a customer service complaint, but with the mission to find a kill shot. The lead investigator was a man named Frank Miller, a quiet, methodical ex-prosecutor, with eyes that missed nothing. He and his team didn't start with Clarice's recent performance reviews. They started with data. They pulled every flight manifest, every inventory log, every crew assignment sheet, and every expense report Clarice had filed for the last 5 years. It was a mountain of digital paperwork, a monument to a long career. And somewhere within it, Frank believed lay the truth. Initial interviews with other senior flight attendants were useless. They closed ranks a wall of professional courtesy and fear. They spoke of Clarice in clipped neutral terms, professional barjas. By the book, old school. But when Frank's team began interviewing the junior crew, the flight attendants in their 20s and 30s who worked the economy cabin and often bore the brunt of Clarice's sharp-tongued authority, cracks began to appear in the facade. The breakthrough came from a young flight attendant named Maria Sanchez. She was only 3 years into her career and was, by all accounts, terrified. In a small, confidential interview room, she twisted a paper coffee cup in her hands, avoiding eye contact. Frank didn't push. He simply asked her to describe a typical flight working with Clarice. It was tense. Maria began, her voice barely a whisper. You had to be perfect. Everything had to be exactly by her rules. If a passenger in your section had a complaint, it was somehow your fault. She had her favorites, and she had the ones she watched. Were you one of the ones she watched? Frank asked gently. Maria nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She said I had an attitude problem. She was always behind me, watching me. But the worst part was the galley. She took a shaky breath. The inventory. She was obsessed with the premium cabin inventory, especially the liquor. And then it all came tumbling out. The system, the scam. Maria explained how on nearly every international flight she'd worked with Clarice, a bottle of something expensive would go missing. A magnum of champagne would be reported as cracked during loading. A bottle of rare single malt scotch would be logged as spilled during severe turbulence, even on the smoothest of flights. Clarice would handle the paperwork herself, with the weary tut-tut of a long-suffering manager cleaning up her subordinates' messes. We all knew, Maria confessed the words, rushing out in a torrent of relieved honesty. We never saw anything break or spill. But who was going to question her? She could get you grounded. She could ruin your career with a single bad report. So we just kept our mouths shut. Maria's testimony was the key. Now Frank's team knew precisely what they were looking for. They cross-referenced Clarice's breakage and spoilage reports with flight data. They found a report claiming severe turbulence over the North Atlantic on a night when flight records showed nothing but clear skies. They matched other reports to dates and times, and then they went to the final irrefutable witness, the security cameras. In the drab surveillance review room, they found it. A clip from 3 weeks prior, on a flight returning from Milan. The timestamp read 03:47 a.m. The galley was empty, save for Clarice. With the calm, practiced efficiency of a seasoned criminal, she took 2 bottles of Sassicaia, a Super Tuscan wine that retailed for over $400 a bottle, and carefully wrapped them in crew-issued wool blankets. She then tucked them deep into her personal rolling tote bag beneath her change of clothes. Her movements were swift, economical, and utterly damning. They found another clip, and another. It was a pattern of systematic theft, hidden in plain sight for years. The reason she had refused Dr. Dubois the Aurora cuvée was now chillingly clear. It was a toxic cocktail of motives. First, her ingrained prejudice made her instinctively deem Serena unworthy. But second, and perhaps more urgently, that specific bottle was a prime target for her next theft. It was new, expensive, and its inventory less established. Dr. Dubois wasn't just a passenger challenging her authority. She was a customer threatening to consume the profits. When Frank Miller presented the file to Robert Caldwell, the CEO felt a cold, grim wave of victory. The file contained sworn statements, falsified inventory logs, and high-resolution screenshots from the CCTV footage. It was an ironclad case. The union will be notified of her termination for cause effective immediately, Caldwell stated to his legal team. The cause is felony theft and fraud, not the incident on Flight 88. That is now a secondary issue. Are we clear?" The lawyers nodded. It was a perfect corporate checkmate. By firing her for theft, they bypassed the union's ability to grieve the termination based on a subjective customer service dispute. Clarice's 32 years of service were nullified. Her pension under the company's gross misconduct clause was forfeited entirely. But Caldwell went one step further. To signal to Dr. Dubois, to his partners, and to the world that Meridian was cleaning house, he made a call. The entire meticulously compiled evidence file was messengered to the Port Authority Police Department at JFK. 2 days later, the doorbell rang at Clarice's beige house. She was on the phone complaining to her sister about the injustice of it all. Annoyed at the interruption, she swung open the door to find 2 uniformed police officers on her perfectly swept porch. "Clarice Jenkins?" the lead officer asked. "Yes," she replied, her tone impatient. "You're under arrest for grand larceny and possession of stolen property." The world tilted on its axis. Clarice let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. "This is absurd. This is about that woman on the plane, isn't it? This is for a glass of champagne." The officer's face was impassive. "No, ma'am," he said, producing a pair of handcuffs. "This is about the approximately $150,000 of property you've stolen from your employer over the past 5 years. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." As the cold steel clicked around her wrists, her composure finally completely shattered. The facade of the professional, the authority figure, the victim. It all dissolved into a pathetic, whimpering panic. As the officers led her to the squad car parked at the curb, she saw the curtains twitching in her neighbor's windows. Across the street, a teenager, drawn by the commotion, was standing on his lawn phone held high. The tiny red light of its recording function was the last thing Clarice saw a final digital judgment capturing her utter and absolute ruin for the entire world to see. The news of Clarice Jenkins' arrest for grand larceny sent a shockwave through the media, a sordid final act that cemented her public disgrace. For Meridian Global, it was a tactical victory. The narrative once centered on systemic racism now had a simpler, more digestible villain, a common thief. Robert Caldwell, however, was no fool. He knew that excising a single cancerous tumor didn't make the patient healthy. The rot Clarice represented, both the bigotry and the criminal entitlement, had been allowed to fester for years under his company's watch. Firing her was pest control. It wasn't cultivating a healthier vineyard. He knew a press release and a corporate donation wouldn't suffice. The wound was too deep, and the woman at the center of it, Dr. Serena Dubois, was not someone who could be placated with empty gestures. He needed to do something unprecedented. He needed to go to her. Caldwell's flight to San Francisco was a study in humility. He, a man who commanded a fleet of hundreds of aircraft and an army of 80,000 employees, was flying as a penitent. As he drove the rental sedan north across the Golden Gate Bridge, leaving the fog-shrouded city behind, the landscape began to change. The concrete and steel gave way to rolling, sun-drenched hills, dotted with the dark green geometry of vineyards. He felt like he was crossing a border into another sovereign nation, a world that operated on different principles: patience, terroir, and time. He was leaving his world of quarterly earnings reports and entering hers, the world of generations. Ethelgard Estates did not announce itself with gaudy gates or a grandiose sign. The entrance was a subtle break in an old stone wall leading down a long drive lined with ancient olive trees. The main building was a stunning piece of modern architecture, all glass, reclaimed wood, and dark steel, designed to blend into the landscape rather than dominate it. It radiated a sense of quiet, profound, and unshakable confidence. It was, Caldwell realized with a jolt, the perfect physical embodiment of its owner. Dr. Serena Dubois was not waiting for him in an office. She met him on the vast open-air crush pad where the harvested grapes began their journey into wine. She wore no uniform of power. Instead, she was in dark denim, scuffed leather work boots, and a simple grey t-shirt, her sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Her handshake was firm, her eyes direct. She looked him over, not with hostility, but with the cool, appraising gaze of a scientist observing a new specimen. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice even, "thank you for making the journey." "The journey was necessary, Dr. Dubois." He responded, feeling overdressed and out of place in his suit. "I am here first and foremost to offer you my personal and profound apology for the disgraceful treatment you received on our airline. There is no excuse." Serena gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Apology accepted. Now let's talk about what happens next." She didn't lead him to a conference room. Instead, she led him on a walk through the vines. The sun was warm on their skin, the air thick with the smell of rich soil and ripening fruit. She spoke of the challenges of the terroir, of the delicate balance of stress and nourishment the vines required to produce the most concentrated flavors. "You can't just flood the roots with water and expect excellence," she explained, stopping to touch the leaf of a gnarled Cabernet Sauvignon vine. "Too much ease makes the fruit bland, unfocused. The quality, the character comes from how the vine responds to the struggle." Caldwell understood. This was not a lecture on viticulture. It was a lesson on character and culture. They sat at a simple stone table overlooking the valley. It was here that Caldwell, feeling the full weight of her home field advantage, laid out his plan. It was the best that corporate crisis management could create. He detailed the immediate termination of not only Clarice, but also her direct supervisors who had ignored years of complaints. He spoke of the tens of millions of dollars allocated for a new top-down diversity, equity, and inclusion program to be designed by the prestigious consulting firm Sterling Price. He outlined a new anonymous third-party reporting system for employee misconduct and a complete overhaul of performance metrics for senior crew, tying promotions and bonuses directly to quantifiable, demographically unbiased passenger satisfaction scores. "It is a comprehensive, aggressive, and deeply funded plan," he concluded, confident in its thoroughness. "It's our commitment to ensuring that what happened to you can never, ever happen again." Serena listened to it all without interruption, her fingers steepled before her. When he was finished, she was silent for a long moment, watching the heat shimmer above the distant vines. "It's a good plan, Mr. Caldwell," she said finally, her voice measured. "It is a textbook example of how to decontaminate a toxic environment. You're spraying for the pest that has infested your vineyard. You are treating the disease. But you are doing nothing to enrich the soil for the future. Everything you have described is reactive. It's about preventing failure. I am interested in building success." Caldwell felt a prickle of confusion. "I'm not sure I follow." "Let me tell you a story," Serena said, her gaze turning inward for a moment. "When I was a graduate student at UC Davis, I was one of 3 black students in the entire oenology program. I was told, not always unkindly, that my opportunities would be limited. That I could consult, maybe work in a lab, but that being the face of a luxury brand, it wasn't done. The only reason I am sitting here today is because the original owner of this land, a man named Arthur Ethelgard, didn't see a black woman. He saw a viticulturist. He gave me a chance to be his apprentice, and when he passed away, He left me this struggling vineyard in his will because he believed I was the only one who understood its soul. One person opening one door changed everything. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. Your company firing a thief and lecturing your staff on bias doesn't open any doors. It just reinforces the locks on the ones that are already closed. What do you propose? Caldwell asked, now genuinely intrigued. I propose a true partnership, something that builds something that lasts longer than a news cycle, she declared. Meridian Global will partner with Ethelgard Estates to create and fully fund a new foundation, the Ethelgard Meridian Hospitality Initiative. Her vision was audacious, and she laid it out with stunning clarity. It wouldn't be a simple scholarship fund. It would be a world-class talent incubator. It would establish partnerships with universities like UC Davis and Cornell's School of Hotel Administration to identify brilliant, high-potential students from underrepresented communities. It would provide them not just with tuition, but with a comprehensive mentorship program, pairing them with executives from both Ethelgard and Meridian. They would get hands-on experience from the chemistry of fermentation in her labs to the logistics of global catering in his. It would create a new, diverse pipeline of future sommeliers, managers, chefs, and executives. You will turn this moment of corporate shame into your proudest legacy. She concluded, her voice ringing with passion. You won't be remembered as the airline that had to fire a racist thief. You will be remembered as the airline that helped change the face of global hospitality. The partnership between Ethelgard and Meridian will no longer be about a champagne on a drink cart. It will be about a shared commitment to the future. That is the only story I am interested in being a part of, and it is the only way our brands will remain associated. Robert Caldwell sat in stunned silence. It was genius. Absolute genius. It was a move that transformed the entire narrative from a defensive apology into an inspiring, proactive mission. It was more expensive than his plan, but its return on investment in terms of branding, public goodwill, and genuine social impact was immeasurable. It was a chance at something he thought was lost: redemption. Yes, he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in weeks. Dr. Dubois, yes, we will do it. A month later, the announcement was made at a joint press conference. The story was no longer about a confrontation at 30,000 feet, but a landmark partnership. Serena stood at the podium, a figure of immense grace and power, speaking not of her insult, but of her ambition for a more equitable world. That evening, as a spectacular Napa sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Serena sat alone on her veranda. She poured herself a single chilled flute of the Aurora Cuvée. As she raised the glass, she watched the tiny persistent bubbles rise to the surface. She thought of the journey from a girl in a university lab to a titan of her industry, from a victim of petty prejudice to the architect of a lasting legacy. She had faced down ugliness, and through skill, strategy, and sheer force of will had transformed it. She had cultivated something beautiful from a rotten harvest. She took a sip. It tasted of resilience. It tasted of justice. It tasted finally like the sweet, complex flavor of a victory well earned. And that's where our story ends, not with a simple firing, but with a profound and lasting transformation. Dr. Serena Dubois didn't just demand an apology, she demanded progress. She showed that when you have a seat at the table, or, in her case, own the entire vineyard, the table is made from you have the power to do more than just call out injustice. You have the power to plant the seeds of change for generations to come. The story of Clarice Jenkins is a harsh lesson in karma, a reminder that prejudice and contempt, no matter how subtly served, can come with a very, very high price. But the story of Dr. Dubois is a masterclass in turning a moment of disrespect into a legacy of opportunity. What do you think of the way she handled it? Was her solution the perfect response? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as compelling as I did, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories of drama, justice, and incredible karma. Thanks for listening.